Just try not to get in any sword fights.
That's right. That's right.
Would you like my jacket to put over your lap? Thank you.
No, I got it back.
Fred just does this online.
What's that?
Fred's
Oh.
here.
Well, you handed me that one, and I'm just
Okay.
like, I'll look at it.
Well, he sits back and like, honey, no. Here,
Yes.
could you mark the attendance, please? And I'm a
Send it to you. You can tell.
pardon. Thank you.
Say they still. In my little pants. No.
There is going to be a Sunday school appreciation banquet next Saturday night for the teachers and all the different ages. So Fred was at a meeting with Margot and Doug planning it yesterday, and one of the things that Margot wants to do is to hand out a prize for every teacher. And so she was giving examples of prizes, and mine was going to be, I don't know what the symbol was, but for tolerance, because of tolerating the noisy kids next door.
I love it.
So yeah, I thought that was, because I'm sure perhaps maybe whoever's teaching next door mentioned something to Margot that
They got called down.
they got called down. Because yeah, when Bill and Janice are on that second row there, and as Janice says it's distracting. It's distracting, and sitting here trying to teach is even.
It's a good distraction.
It's a good
We
distraction.
could install a lovely decorative sound suppressor all across the wall.
Hey, we've got video screens and at some point, I guess we could turn and face the other way, but there's a lot of plugged in stuff up here. I just wanted to take a minute, and I'm not gonna get through this without crying, but that's okay. When we first moved, Fred finished seminary. No, we finished seminary. It's a joint venture. But we finished seminary, and Fred's first church out of seminary was Love Memorial Baptist Church in Gastonia, North Carolina. And very early on, we met a couple, Willie and Shirley Sutton. And they had a son. Fred's job was Minister of Education, Music, and Youth, which is, you need your head examined when you try to take on 3. But I pretty much did the youth ministry. And so Willie and Shirley Sutton had a young son, 6th grade youth minister, tall, skinny Steve. He was a real estate agent and helped us buy our very first house when interest rates were like 14%. Remember those days, some of us? But both of them just wrapped themselves around our family in a way that it just was amazing. Now, they were older than us. They were like 20 years older. They had the child a little bit late in life. They were 20 years older than me. And then when the girls were born, we didn't have in-town grandparents. And I'll be honest, the grandparents that we had were very limited. So Mama Shirley and Papa Willie became the in-town grandparents, and they lived just up the street. And Mama Shirley worked in the children's department and the little kids department because, boy, she had a heart for loving kids. It was just, it was amazing. And on Wednesday nights, they would take the girls home because we were doing choir. And Kara was always the fussy baby, and she could lay on Papa Willie's belly and rock, and she'd go to sleep. And they would give the girls a bath in the sink. So when we picked them up, they were ready to go. And we stayed in contact with them. We left Love Memorial in maybe 86. And we have stayed in they drove up here for the girls' weddings all this time. And that woman, she's passed away this week. She had last months were very difficult with, even the last year or 2 years, with dementia. She had all kinds of health issues. She'd fallen, she'd broken her hip, she was in care. But I got to thinking, the impact of that couple and that woman was just, it can't be measured. And then I got to thinking, what kind of impact, and we were not her physical by blood children and grandchildren, which didn't matter at all. What's going to be the impact of our lives, 20 years down the road, when, at least I hope, that I'm getting ready to go home, and somebody's going to look back and say, what kind of impact have we had in this world? Now hers, if the children that she impacted through her life all lined up, have no idea how many children would line up and say, Mama Shirley and Papa Willie. They would take their vacation and go on youth trips with us that we would take the youth on, so that they could take care of the girls when we did youth trips.
Oh my goodness.
They were just absolutely fabulous people. They had the one son, he's grown and 50 now, which doesn't seem real. He has 2 kids that are grown. And I've just been thinking, so when the services are going to be, we'll be going down to North Carolina sometime this week, and with Thea and the family, Kara. But it's just been on my mind, how am I impacting the people in the world that I live in? And it doesn't have to be tons of children that come through. And then I was thinking about we will get to the lesson in a minute, I was thinking about my grandmother. I've talked about her a lot because she was someone, she couldn't read, she couldn't write. And as she aged and and she had an awful case of scoliosis, and the girls named her Bended Back Granny, not in disrespect or anything, but she was. And even when she got toward the end of her life and mobility was an issue and getting out to church was an issue, people would say, we need to call Miss Annie Pearl because she will pray. So even though she couldn't do anything else in the church, we call Miss Annie Pearl. So she set an example for me of, even when I get to the point where I can't do anything else, which I hope I won't get to that point, she still prayed. So you might muddle this around in your head, but it's been on my heart. And I was singing this morning when we were singing, boy, I'm Mama Shirley. She is singing and she is well today, and boy, that's a blessing. So thank y'all for letting me talk about Mama Shirley this morning. Okay, we're going to change gears to pick up your mat. Eric, good to have you in here.
Good to have you.
Feel free to jump in anytime you want to jump in with our class. So y'all, as you know, we're in John. When Eric was talking, Jason was talking about they've started a study in Matthew. We got up to finally now John chapter 5, and I have a blank screen. Wonder what I was going to do on that blank screen.
It doesn't matter now, keep going.
It doesn't matter.
That was the Mama Shirley screen.
That was, not meant to be. I was thinking, I'm blank now as to what I was going to do, but something ideally to engage us. We're going to talk about the encounter with Jesus at the pool of, depending on your translation, it could be the pool of Bethesda or the pool of Bethsaida, however it's pronounced. I was looking, NIV and ESV call it Bethesda. King James calls it Bethsaida. I have not a clue. But the Bible story will tell us how Jesus healed and the man who was lame and could not get down into the pool. This is what that area looks like today. Now, through a couple of 2 centuries, they said things had been built on it, churches had been built on it. So I can't get what it really looked like, but it still exists where they think it existed then. So that's, I wanted you to have a mental picture of that. Kendall, would you mind reading for us the white? That's verse 1.
Sure. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie: the blind, the lame, the paralyzed.
Okay, we've just got a scene going on. This is inside the walled city of Jerusalem. It's not out there anywhere. I find it interesting that he describes it so specifically as the 5 covered colonnades around it. This would have been a common sight for John to see, for any of them to see. I don't know when it was built, that pool. Something it was like a 2-step. I don't know if that's a pool here, then one a little bit to the side and lower. But people used to go there who were paralyzed and lame, blind. Now I put a little note here. In the King James Version, it tells us a little bit more while it was special. And here it is. Here, wholly or in part, paralyzed, and they waited for the moving of the waters. From time to time, an angel of the Lord would come down and stir up the waters. The first one into the pool after each such disturbance would be cured of whatever disease they have. So, can you imagine if it was all around, people all around that pool, if I made it first, the first person to, look at the competitiveness. You put 2 kids out, first person who, the grandkids, the first person who wants to sit on a certain side of the seat in the back seat, and the other one won't sit, and then the other one will say, well, it doesn't matter, and then the one who got it will say, well, if it doesn't matter, why do you want it? There's logic in that, So we've got our setting of what's going to happen in this. Now, I started thinking, I also don't think we understand what it meant in those days to be lame or paralyzed. When you think about it, those are all, I looked for devices to assist people with disabilities, and there were pages of pictures that come up. Some I had never, look at the pen holder up there. Took a tennis ball, stuck a pin through it. Because if there is arthritis and things like that and you can't hold a pen, you hold the tennis ball. So if we've got all these things, and some of us have been on wheelchairs and walkers and crutches. I've never yet to learn how to walk on crutch. There was nothing like that. Absolutely nothing. So we think, I broke my foot and I can't walk. Oh, Fred one time did his foot surgery and had one of those scooter things where you bend your knee and your knee is on the thing, and then you just scoot all around. I want us to do this so that we get a sense of the absolute helplessness of this man. So when Jesus heals him, the miracle is so much more than our foot recovers from surgery and now we can walk. So if you're just curious, Google that on Google Images and look at what comes up. So now he continues with the story. Somebody else want to do that verse in white?
One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?"
You want to get well? Is that not an odd question? Usually, a lot of times it was the person coming to Jesus who, or a family of the person who needed healing would go to Jesus. Remember, the woman who had bled for 12 years goes and touches just his garment. I can't imagine in that culture, 38 years, this guy's been an invalid. And invariably, what was the standard teaching? If something bad happened to you, it was because
You
You're
sinned.
bad.
you sinned. You've been bad. You have done something wrong. Even your parents may have sinned, and it got passed down to you. That's our tech monitor who watches us stream as they're driving from Edgewater. So good. Thanks, Mike. Okay. So, sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. What a heartbreaking thing to say. He's still there, and he knows that he's probably never going to get in that water. Because if you're blind and want to get in the water, you can kind of feel your way because your legs are working. But if you were lame and you were paralyzed, most likely it was going to be maybe dragging himself by his arms. Someone gets ahead of me, Jesus. Then Jesus said, get up, pick up your mat and walk. And at once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and he walked. Now look at that. He had to demonstrate obedience. What if he hadn't gotten up? Would he have been healed? I don't think so. I think he would have still been lying beside that water, wanting to get in. So there was a level of obedience that he had to do. Now, actually, he had to do two things. He had to stand up. If I'm down on my knees on the floor doing something, bopping up something, I don't care what it is, and I go to stand up, things start creaking. Knees, ankles. And some days, depending if I'm not completely down, depending on how I have gotten down, I need to, because I'm clumsy anyway, I need to hang on to something so I can get up without falling on my face. This man was told to do, get up, three things. Pick up your mat and walk. Okay? Now, two of the last three are going to become really sort of the real problem that's going to come up. Okay? It was fascinating. He didn't debate that with Jesus. He said, okay. The man was cured. He picked up his mat and he walked. So now let's see the problem. Here you go. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, it's the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat. Not to walk, but to carry your mat. So look at Jesus. You see what Jesus could have just told him to stand up and walk. But Jesus added one more part to the equation. Now, at this point with this miracle, in the book of John, the Pharisees now have switched and are after Jesus. So far it'd been okay, but now this is the first miracle where they're going to keep him in their sights. They missed the point of the miracle because they were so obsessed with the law of checking the boxes or putting an X in the box because he should not have done this. Okay, now, I got interested, and I know this is a lot of text. I got interested in what were the laws in first century Jerusalem. or Israel, that they had to obey. Now, the commandment was, thou shalt keep the Sabbath
Holy.
holy. Okay. They developed 39 laws so they would keep the one law. So here it is. The Mishnah is one of the books that interprets Old Testament scripture, I guess is a way to explain it. It lists 39 primary kinds of labor that were not allowed on the Sabbath day. The first of the 11 of these were steps leading to the production and preparation of bread: sowing, plowing, reaping, binding sheaves, threshing, winnowing, selecting, grinding, sifting, kneading, and baking. So, excuse me. Thea, you're not making bread. Thea's quite the homemade bread maker.
I'm making 2 things of bread this afternoon. I'm sorry.
Can Annie come to my house?
No.
No. She does bake bread and send it our way, but it's really good. So here come the next 12 steps. It has to do with the preparation of clothing, from shearing the sheep all the way to putting the garments together. Now, there's 7 steps in preparing the carcass of a deer for use as food or for leather. And the remaining items have to do with writing, building, kindling, extinguishing fires, and they also deal with the transportation of articles from one place to another. So do you see how the map fits into this? He was transporting an article. Now, Jesus didn't do anything by accident. This whole thing is going to be used in the life of this man, and then in what the Pharisees saw. So this is to keep one law, they developed 39 that became, and I'm drawing a blank on the word, it was a word that you have to do something and check off all the boxes, and there's no flexibility with it. It'll come to me.
Prerequisite?
Checklist.
Supersedes.
These are all good and all capturing a.
Not that word.
It's not that word, but
Not that word.
you're all capturing a part of it. I'm sorry, it's not coming to me right now. Look at the very onerous burden that would fall on people to be faithful to that. So you better be prepared ahead of time if you're going to eat on the Sabbath. For the women, you've got to make sure all this other is done prior to the Sabbath.
My aunt used to prepare the Sabbath meal on Friday.
Yes. So then I decided it might be interesting to, I go down these rabbit holes when I'm prepping because I think it just is fascinating. So I Googled what does, for Orthodox Jews today, and it's called the Shabbat, if I'm Marshall not pronouncing it, Shabbat
Yeah.
laws. What are some of the laws today? And I certainly am not gonna read them all. No, I don't want to subscribe. And let me make this a little bigger. There's my plus sign.
Control plus.
Okay. Okay, there we go. I'm not going to read all of that, but I wanted to, basic activities, which are the refrain from on the Sabbath: riding, erasing, tearing, business transactions, driving or riding in cars or other vehicles. So Orthodox Jewish communities are very close to where the synagogue is. Shopping, using the telephone, turning off or on anything that uses electricity, including lights, radio, television, computers, air conditioners, and alarm clocks.
Elevators in hospitals.
Elevators in hospitals. If you go to
Sinai.
Sinai Hospital, it will stop. Kara at times has worked on the Sabbath. She will say that elevator will stop on every single floor so that for those don't have to push the button. cooking, baking, kindling a fire, gardening, grass mowing, doing laundry. In an effort to keep the Sabbath holy, this is part of what an Orthodox Jewish person, they would do in their family. And I went on this long article, went ahead and read it, and some of it they have like motion sensors on the lights. So if you walk into a room, the light will come on, then it will time out, so you're not having to turn something off or on. It takes a lot of planning and preparation to observe the Sabbath.
A number of appliances now, back from my appliance days, have Sabbath mode.
Yeah, so you can program the oven to cook, I guess, or somewhat like that. Now, going back to our Pharisees, they missed the point of the miracle. They were so obsessed with the law and custom that they missed it. So they've asked this man, obviously, I don't know how they knew that the man was healed. Are they just keeping an eye what's going on in the synagogue? Here's this man, they're starting to get word of what he's doing. But he replied, the man who made me well said to me, pick up your mat and walk. I had never thought about that. But what is that man doing that's not necessarily a good thing?
It's not my fault, it's Jesus' fault.
It's not my fault. Jesus told me to, but
Or he could be saying somebody more powerful than you.
he
told
could
me
be
to do
saying
it.
somebody more powerful.
I
Now,
like that.
when
Can I
we
use that at work?
a little bit further on down, it leads us almost to believe, I'm not going to take responsibility. He just told me to do it, so I did it. So the man, and when we get further down, y'all can read the scripture and see if it's striking you like that. So they ask him, who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk? Okay, let's go find the man who told you that. Because they thought no observant Jew to the law would have ever told him to pick up his bed and walk on the Sabbath or pick up his mat. So here we go. They're going to go find this man who's not observant of the rules of the Sabbath. Now, the man who was healed had no idea of who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. That was common for Jesus. He didn't do a miracle to get attention. There are times he did miracles and he said he did it to bring glory to who?
To God.
To God. But other times he slipped away. Remember when his mama told him, they ran out of wine, I want you to turn the water into wine. And he said, woman, which isn't a title of disrespect, like we would, my time is not yet come to do this. But he did it anyway. So another story for another day. So later Jesus found him at the temple. Now we don't know how later is, and said to him, see, you are well again. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. We don't know exactly what Jesus meant by saying that to him. Had he done something 38 years ago that caused the disability? Was there a sin that he committed 38 years ago that had a consequence? This happens today. There are sins that we can commit. Somebody drives drunk and kills somebody. You're going to live with the impact of that for the rest of your life. Also, depending especially where you are living, you're going to spend the rest of your life. So we don't know.
Oh, I would say that's just a general thing that you could say to anybody.
Stop sinning.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. For him, it could have been a sinning in his attitude, because Jesus didn't have to see physical behavior. He could have read this man's emotions and the intent of his heart, and what if he's thinking, golly, I hope they don't ask me again about this man. So Jesus deliberately, it sounds like, it does not sound like Jesus happened to bump into him. It looks like Jesus sought him out and found him at the temple. I have no idea how many people would have been at the temple. I'm sure it was more than what we would have in our congregation this morning. So to find him was interesting. Now, the man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well. So that goes back to, remember when we had looked at that, he said, the man who made me well did it. Why did he go and tell the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus? I don't.
Take the blame off of himself.
I mean, you've been sitting for what was the original number? 38 years you've been sitting by the water?
Yeah.
And now you're going to go day one out of there. Now you're going to get thrown out of your community.
Yeah. So if I go tell
So
maybe.
why wouldn't you? There's a ton of pressure on him. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
He's looking at self-preservation.
Yeah. He did not have to go. Maybe, as Josh said, maybe they told him, if you find out the name of that man, you come tell us. And he's not going to go against that kind of social and religious pressure. Maybe he was scared. We don't know why he did that, but he did it. So here is where we're going to learn about John says Jesus is showing his authority. So because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. Remember I said this was the chapter 5 is where it's going to change. In his defense, Jesus said to them, my Father is always at his work to this very day. Eric, that ties in with your sermon today. My Father is always at work. And I too am working. For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making him equal with God. Those two things that he did are the two things that are going to follow him throughout the rest of his ministry, especially calling himself equal with God. There is no one that should be equal with God. I mean, the closest you can get to being equal with God is if you say, we're descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I just think about his ministry, and he's God in the flesh. But even I don't know this just kind of got to the heart of who Jesus is and what he was here to do. That he was not going to waste time placating the religious leaders. That he was going to stand, follow the Father, be obedient to what the Father had told him to do. Because why was he trying to lead them? What was he saying about those 39 laws?
Because they weren't as important as they thought they were.
They were not as important as the miracle that he did. Now, he certainly never said not keep the Sabbath holy, but he was saying a legalistic look at your faith is missing the miracle. You should be rejoicing that this man is now walking.
What are some of our takeaways there? I mean, you say in your commentary at the bottom there are two sins: breaking the Sabbath and calling himself equal with God. Of course, we recognize Christ as leading a perfectly sinless life. So, in our view, breaking the Sabbath wasn't a sin for him. Is that because he was God and he could reassign the rules of the Sabbath? Or is that because they had overinterpreted the rules of the Sabbath and they had these secular rules that were added to God's command? Or is it because he's modeling that you'll find times in life where there's more than one rule and you're supposed to prioritize them? You know, for example, thou shalt not kill. Well, but you're a soldier and you're protecting your country.
Right.
And so, maybe he's, is that what he's doing? Is he modeling that it's our responsibility to prioritize in situations where you can't follow all the rules?
The person over the procedure,
Mm-hmm.
the procedure is you don't pick up anything on the Sabbath. The person was healed. That's interesting to think.
Yeah, when we look at it as, well, God said, don't work on the Sabbath. So maybe the Jewish leaders had overinterpreted that and said, well, don't pick up your bedroll on the Sabbath because that's work. So they defined what work was. And so maybe, the original thing to them was, don't do hard labor on the Sabbath.
And then it became.
And then it became, all these extra cultural rules got added to it. So that could be an interpretation, or it could be well, Jesus is God, he can set aside that rule for himself, but not for anybody else. Or just for himself and the person he told to pick up their bedroll. I don't know the answer to those questions,
Right,
I'm just asking
right.
questions.
I think when you look at the commandments, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. That's the only, that's what we're told to do. And I think some of this is Jesus saying, remembering the Sabbath day and keeping it holy is going about the work of my Father and healing people. So for us, we don't heal people necessarily, although you could say that the work of doctors and nurses and EMTs is healing people, and their work is needed all the time. But our job is sharing the gospel, and we're supposed to be doing that work all the time. That is how we keep the Sabbath holy.
That's another way to look at it. Brad and I were talking yesterday. What do you think? How would our culture change if on Sunday all the stuff that we do, we didn't do? From the standpoint, let's don't take church out of the thing. And let's don't get
Would be
legalistic.
awesome, quite frankly.
Let's,
Back in the
I
days
don't
of
want
Blue
us,
Laws.
I don't want us to be legalistic about it. But, some of us are old enough in here to, nothing was open on Sunday. No restaurants. The pharmacy in my little small town, if you were sick, it was closed on Sunday, but everybody knew the pharmacist. And if you needed medicine, you could call him and he would come open up his store and give you whatever you needed. But can you think, I think that Sabbath rest is something that, because it has been done away with, has had an impact on us physically and mentally, and
But think about the people who live paycheck to paycheck, working day to working day, who need the money that they earn working 7 days a week to keep lights on and roofs over their head. So being able to say, oh, we're just not going to do anything Sabbath because God said so, that's a place of privilege that we then oppress other people with by saying, well, we're not going to work, you can't work. Business is closed. Are we feeding those people? Are we giving shelter to those people? Are we supporting those people who do not have the privileges that we have?
yeah, I'm not saying.
No, I know what you're saying, but that's
The
you have to keep
practical.
going with the practicality of it. And I would say that Jesus would say, if you're not taking care of the widow, the orphan, the poor, the person in jail, the person who's sick, then you're not honoring the Sabbath.
Well, but, this is an interesting discussion, but this Sabbath, the rule, remember the Sabbath, keep it holy, has been fulfilled in Christ. That's not a rule we follow today.
Y'all agree with that? the Ten Commandments were not,
Did you remember yesterday and keep it holy? Was yesterday a holy day for you?
no, well,
In the first century church's time, this was the work day, the first work
Right.
day
yeah,
of the week. And they worked on Sunday.
yeah.
Uh,
But there was time set aside. But even in the early church, because many of the converts were Jewish,
yeah, they would,
they still would keep.
and then they would meet on the evening
would-
on Saturday, and that was when Sunday started, was when the sun went in. But it's a question, you know, there are lots of rules and regulations in the Old Testament
That we don't keep,
that we don't keep.
right?
And so the reason for that is because we're evil and we don't keep them, or because they've been fulfilled and they don't apply to us anymore. And
But see, I would say the Ten Commandments apply.
Yeah.
What?
But why just to your chaos point? Why just those 10?
yeah, you know,
Why
just
just
those
those 10? And
Because-
I'm a devil's advocate. Like I
Well,
take
one
your
of them
point.
is remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy,
Yeah.
right?
Right?
Which we don't do.
There shall have no other gods before me,
which we don't do.
but that's something.
Well,
We
as
should
an
do.
organization, we do that. We don't have any other gods before God. Individuals sometimes put things ahead and stuff like that. But, I mean, but as an organization, we don't. We like conflate Sunday with the Sabbath, and we, you know, we're not really following that rule,
Keeping the Sabbath holy.
right?
Well, so when the years that we were growing, the very first Sunday we had moved to Maryland, I left my house, got on to drive to Glen Burnie Baptist Church from our house. It was maybe 5 minutes. Came up and turned left at the road, Old Stage Road, and there was the middle school there, Corcoran Middle School, and there were kids out on the field with sports. And I'm sure my mouth dropped to no end, because still, and this one in South Carolina, we moved up here in 95, 6. It was still in our little town, was not sports on Sunday. Now when my grandma was growing up, she never played cards, but you couldn't play cards on Sunday. You couldn't, we Good Baptist added a lot of other rules. You couldn't cut the grass on Sunday. You couldn't wash your car on Sunday. And so, did we develop the legalism and miss the whole point of it? I don't know. The once a month, I told you this church in Union was raising money, Methodist Church, to pay for their Family Life Center, otherwise known as a gym. So one Sunday a month, the women I'm sure it was just the women, put together this huge meal, and everybody. So you go and you'd pay for it, and you sat there, and I mean it was soup to nuts. And let's just say the parking lot at Mount Etna Baptist Church cleared out pretty darn fast on that Sunday of the month.
Because you wanted to beat the rest of the Methodists.
That's
But
right.
you wanted to meet and the kids would go out and play in the
cemetery.
cemetery, which is probably where you developed your love of
Yeah.
cemeteries. But the restaurants in town were closed. So, had we developed but no, Jean's Fine Food was open, because we'd go after church on Sunday night
With the chicken truck.
with the chicken truck.
Okay, Sal?
And the drugstores, pharmacies would open like from 1 to 5. So were we even then, it used to be called in South Carolina blue laws that kept things closed. I'm sure those blue laws are now gone laws, but how then do we keep the Sabbath in such a way that we fulfill the commandment without moving into legalism, where, okay, you can eat at the Methodist church once a month, but you can't go to the restaurants right after church, you know, between 1 and 5, you can go get medicine, but if you need it before 1, unless the pharmacist is in your church, and he'll go and open up if you need it, which was just like when I don't know, how do we keep today and honor the spirit of it, but don't get into, I find myself having grown up very much a legalist as a believer. I was, you know, in my church, Little Baptist Church, you didn't dance. So I missed an invitation to the prom. Now, they would have a reason as to why you didn't dance that they told all the girls. I'm not sure they told all the guys, but you didn't dance. Certainly didn't drink. And on and on and on were the list of things Christians do not do.
Good
And
Christians.
Good Christians, and I worked really hard to check off all those boxes. I don't know if that's a Deep South church thing. We're looking at 40 years ago. I mean, so how do we keep the Sabbath in the spirit of which we're called to keep it, that it's a day that is honoring of God, a day that includes a nap in the afternoon.
Thus
So-
saith the Lord.
Thus saith the Lord, the Sabbath rest. We are still real big on the Sabbath rest in the afternoon. I don't have an answer for that as to what our behavior should be. But then, but I'm not saying, certainly the people, thank God there are doctors and nurses and police and all these people who work on Sunday. Some churches have church services on Saturday so that they can be a part. I know I'm rambling, but I've thought about this. Fred and I talked about it yesterday, or was it this morning, honey?
On both, I think.
As I've mentioned before, I was raised in a very legalistic tradition, and so I always peek out. I've moved on to the much more liberal and relaxed Baptist religion
Compared to where?
since then. You know, I always look at these legalistic things. Also, I'm a computer guy, so I'm always looking at all the logic and stuff like that. And so when churches say, we follow the rules because the perfect rules in the Bible tell us exactly what to do, I've never found a church that actually did that, including this one. You know, because it's hard to interpret what it says. It's hard to, without just looking at something logically, without leading with your heart and with the Spirit of God, it's hard to follow that. You know, the Bible says that you should be quiet in church. Women should be quiet in church. You should only ask your husband for things about God, because you should be quiet in church.
And the
Who
Bible
follows that?
says that the young women will prophesy. So,
Yes. Ooh, yeah.
but
What's
I'm
the
not
deal?
young anymore.
What's the deal? You know, so whenever you play
discriminate
the
in
absolute
fights anymore.
legalism, the Bible is a computer program, and you have to follow everything in it. It just doesn't work.
So I think, like what the Pharisees missed was the actual intent of what the Sabbath was supposed to do.
Yeah.
Right? And, you know, Jesus says, right, the Sabbath made for man, not man for the Sabbath, right? And my interpretation of it has always been that that day was supposed to be, whatever day it was supposed to be different. Like somebody's Sabbath may be a Monday or a Thursday, depending on the work week. And if you look at the time when that commandment was given, the Jews just came out of slavery, where they were work 12, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? Where God was trying to break them of that, right? Where you need to have
Because he had
healthy
not
rest.
given the Ten
Right.
Commandments while they were in slavery in
Exactly.
Egypt till
Yeah.
after that.
So, you know, but, you know, I think to kind of what he's kind of getting at is, you know, I think we need to understand the intent of the law versus what, you know, the Pharisees or traditions have actually said what they need to be.
I follow two couples on TikTok who are Orthodox Jews. One's certainly more Orthodox than the other, And they're fast. They're the most adorable couples I've ever seen. And part of what they do is they explain, like, what does it mean to be an Orthodox Jew in 2023? And they were taught, the one that's more Orthodox, she covers her hair, wears a wig, doesn't wear pants. But Moses and Zipporah, love them to death. They're adorable.
That's their name.
But yeah, which is funny if you think about it, right? 'Cause
Moses and
Zipporah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
good,
right?
Yeah. She didn't like it was the circumcision.
Never
Moses.
mind. That's not the point.
Okay.
So they
No.
go through prepping for the Sabbath, and
I
they
didn't
talk
mean it
about
like that.
all the things that they have to do to get ready. And it was funny because Melissa, and I can't remember her husband's name. She keeps kosher and all of those things, but she does not. Certainly, she doesn't cover her hair, and she wears pants and swimsuits and all that kind of stuff. And they were on a cruise, and they provide all the kosher food on the cruise. And she was saying that it's difficult on the Sabbath to get around on a cruise ship because they're huge, right?
Right.
You want to
Elevators.
do 30 flights of steps every day? She's like, well, but if we can catch an elevator where somebody else has already pushed the button, it doesn't count. And I think that's a level of splitting hairs that I think gets to the point. It's like, well, I'm not doing the work, someone else is doing the work, and they're not Jewish, so it doesn't count. But I'm like, the intent is to honor the Sabbath. Are you really doing that if you're able to hand wave away an obligation? Or some folks go so far as to tear their toilet paper on the Friday so that they don't have to tear toilet paper on the Sabbath. And that's the tearing of paper is in one of the rules. And
See
it's,
what you learn when you come to this class,
I was
Eric?
thinking, like,
Well,
what if you run out? Then what happens?
Right.
You know?
Well, the lights in your room on the cruise turn on when you go in. There's no flipping of switches.
Now you have to put the card in.
and even some of that is that there's they will get people to open their doors if they use the swipey card things, because that's an electric spark. And it's interesting watching two very different Orthodox Jews and how they observe the different aspects of the Sabbath. But I think, we were talking about this the other day, weren't we?
Probably.
I think we were. Anyway, that just it comes back to it's missing the point of how much are we making how we honor God about us, and how much are we making it about honoring God.
Because I can say I kept all the rules.
Right.
Yeah,
Jesus always. I'm sorry.
I was just saying, you can look at what God did by creating the Sabbath as a celebration, and also the comment, the Sabbath was made for man. He's trying to create in the Jewish people a cultural respect for God. And it's not about whether you made bread this day or whether you walked one step more than a mile or whatever the rules are. It's about creating a deep cultural respect for God and for your association with Him. And that's what it's about. So if we can look at the rules in the Bible and use our reason like that to figure out why it's there and follow the spirit of the rule, Jesus says, love your neighbor love God and love your neighbor as yourself, and that's all the rules come from that.
Jesus put the person ahead of the rule. And but the woman at the well last week, he was leading her toward the spiritual. But he didn't say go back to that, fifth person you live with and you can just ignore that. So I just think if we found some time during the week to step back, to just take a breath, because we don't even take a breath anymore. And even, here at church, we sometimes, I'm sitting, I listened to what you had to say very much. I didn't tune out. But it's always in the back of my mind, do I have everything ready for this? Is there a point I want to make? Let me get in here and get this all connected. none of those are bad things, but can I move from the technology to focus? Is it gonna go through and I'm waiting for a text that it's not going through, to focusing on why we are really here. You know, why are, I just hope you'll think about this whole setting aside time to reflect and worship and
So I think it's about looking at, do we look at Sabbath as an opportunity or an obligation? And I have
That's
a
true.
fantastic sermon about that very topic that I'll never get to preach, but that's beside the point. But that's, when you look at it, it's, are you looking at honoring God as an obligation, as something you have to do, or is it an opportunity that we are given? And how does changing your mindset over why we honor God change your relation? We're casting out demons next door. Good
see why
night.
I'm gonna get the award for tolerance with that.
Good grief. Actually, train of thought completely. I think if you change your view of why we honor God and the purpose of the Sabbath to an opportunity to deepen your relationship with Him, that's the point.
I would agree that is the point of the Sabbath, but the point of any day.
Sure.
Is any day more holy, but the Sabbath at least, or Sunday or some point, just to step back, take a breath, realign our focus maybe for the week. I don't know. You can put all this in your another
The
sermon.
next one? Yeah.
Yeah, another sermon for another day.
Ben might give you rights to that sermon.
It'll cost you.
So, thanks to those who are listening and watching, and will watch later in the week. I hope you have a time to worship. And so we're going to say goodbye to these people because it's about time to